sorry to disappoint, there will be no AI in this session, just sustainability. Okay, hit the button. Today we're going to talk about architecting for sustainability. We're going to look at data and what data you need to collect in order to be compliant with these sustainability targets. We're going to look at EU legislations and what we're seeing in the industry and how we're going to become compliant with them. And then finally, we're going to look at governance. How are you going to be able to govern all this data and get it to the right people at the right time? So I'm going to start by setting the scene. Oh no, I'm going to start by introducing. My name's Elodie Hutson, and this is...
I'm Jesper Leth, and I'm with Nexer, and Elodie is with Stibo Systems.
Yep, cool. I'm going to set the scene. So, what are we seeing today in the world of sustainability? At the moment, we're seeing over 600 plus sustainability assessments, targets, regulations. And these are changing regularly. We're seeing within 3 months, new legislations coming into effect. And we're also seeing that more and more of these legislations are not optional. They're becoming mandatory, and they're coming with fines. So let's look into one of these legislations that we're seeing a lot, or one of the bodies that govern these legislations. And that would be the EU. We're finding that at the moment, there are 3 large EU legislations that we need to become compliant with. So let's say, as an organization, you want to be compliant with any legislation that comes out of the EU. What does that look like for you guys? We've found that these are the 3 biggest legislations we have. So, CBAM, Carbon Border Adjustment, DPP, Digital Product Passport, and EUDR, EU Deforestation Regulation. These are all coming out in the next few years or are active now. So, you're an EU organization, you want to be compliant with the biggest EU targets you're around. How are we going to do that? What data do you need to collect? So this is just an example of a few bits of the data you're going to need to collect on every single product within your organization. So imagine this many data points for your thousands of products you have. That's a lot of data you need to manage and store and be accurate. And then sometimes send it to a third-party legislation to be approved and do much more with it. But you'll also find there's a lot of similarities within this data. There's things like HS codes can be used for EUDR. They can also be used for things like CBAM. So how do you maintain and govern that data efficiently so you can send it to the right parties? I'm going to hand it over to Jesper, who's going to talk about governance.
Thank you. Because the governance part is a critical area to make sure that you are building a solid foundation for the data. So it's not scattered in all different places, but also how you can make sure that the data is actually connectable, so you can ingest it for different reasons and then have trust in the output that is coming out of it. So what I'm going to talk about is to give you some tips, some guidance in terms of how to build a data strategy that can help with this. Because all the data that Elodie was talking about, well, how do I actually manage all this data? And imagine that you have the tree that is the beautiful part, it's green, it's with flowers and what have you. Oh, no flowers on a tree, but never mind. But you need all the data underneath. So how do you make sure that you are getting all this data in place so you will actually have a tree that can actually be the beauty of the forest? But in order to do that, you also need to make sure that you have a strategy that is in balance. Because on one side, you can say that we need to have a lot of strict governance to the data because we need to adhere to all these regulations coming out of the EU. And if you're focusing very much on that part, you can likely kill the organization with requirements on the data side. And on the other side, you have a business that you need to run. You need to be competitive. You need to be on the edge of what the market is asking for. So that balance can be difficult to find. So bear that in mind, that there's likely no silver bullet to this part. It's to find the combination that is right for your company and having that open conversation and, well, dare to speak up in the organization to say, well, what do we actually do? What kind of priorities are we putting into this? So as part of any normal strategy, there's a lot of components that is in place. And beside the green ones that is coming in here, the other ones are the typical ones that would be into a data governance framework. But I've added two more about the compliance part, but also the purpose. And looking at it from a sustainability point of view, the purpose is important to understand what is the actual requirement that is in your industry, in your market, with the type of products that you are sourcing to the market. So taking that into a normal data strategy framework is essential to do that. And there's a lot of text on this one. I'm not expecting you to read all of it, but just be mindful that typical data governance strategies, they will apply. The difficult part is that the pace or the requirements in the market, they are moving so fast, as Elodie was talking about, that new requirements are coming all the time. So how to actually have a solid framework where you can respond to those requirements. And it's not an easy task. It requires a good, solid foundational framework, because there's a lot of moving pieces. And on this one, well, we have the expectations on the left side with the customer engagement, and there's a lot of connecting parts that will help one another to make sure that you are meeting the market with the customer requirements, but also on the compliance part. So overall, in the end, that you have trust in your data, so you can syndicate or make that data available to other different either downstream systems or in the wider supply chain, because that's another thing that's coming with the sustainability. You cannot just box in on your own data. You also need to look at the data in a wider supply chain. So it's not only yours, it's also how you're collaborating with suppliers, with agents and what have you. And the ESG part, the sustainability part, is an integral part of this one. In some way, I want to make sure that we have somehow a common understanding that this is a kind of a big setup. And different reports, for instance, PwC is talking about what they will call the Great Sustainability Data Challenge. And in this part, it's mainly to make sure that it's a huge and it's a complex setup. And if you're just taking the back seat and waiting for it to happen, then you will likely be facing some really issues later on. So appreciate it and take it up front, because it can be a struggle to get it right. And there needs to be a lot of transparency into this setup. And one of the things that we find is that there are many companies that, or where we're seeing it when we're out talking to different companies, that they are seeing that data are either incomplete, or they are unreliable, or they may not be well integrated into the business data. And these different parts is the key parts. And just asking you, Elodie, do you see that same part when we're coming from the consultancy side of it and you're from the system vendor side?
Yes, definitely. We find a lot of the customers we're dealing with, no matter whether they have an MDM or PMDM system, they're still managing most of their sustainability data in Excel spreadsheets, which you can imagine with the amount of data points and the repetitive of those data points, you have inaccuracies and overlaps and holes in that data.
Good. And that is actually a really big challenge. So for this part, I want to mention 5 what I would call data pillars that could be interesting to look at when defining a data strategy. First is about to make sure that the overall company actually does have a sustainability strategy. So what does it mean for you? What does it mean for the way that you operate your business? What are you trying to achieve? Is it just to play catch up in terms of different regulatory requirements, or would it actually try to be a frontier in the market and want to take this forward? Because the second part would be about the sustainability data that would be needed. And we see in a lot of different companies that the sustainability data is actually where they start, because how does it actually tie into the overall strategy? So it's a bit kind of, the opposite direction, but both parts is actually needed. Third, it's about having some kind of commonality in the data, so you can actually make them connect. So you can say that whatever is coming from a supplier in terms of how much carbon emission a certain product may have, how does it actually come into your business? What is your footprint? And how do you share that forward with others? The fourth part is to make sure that you have what you call detailed data, meaning that how granular can you go with the data? And the more granular you will be, it will also take more time. So finding a balance for it is important. And right now in the market, they are talking about primary and secondary data, where the secondary data could be something that you find from researchers or from professors or from different verifiers that have been out looking for data. But what the EU is asking for is actual data from your business, how it is performing. So how do you collect it? How do you have an information model that can capture this data? And then last, if we go back a few years, defining a data strategy was something that within the next 3 or 5 years, the data strategy should look like this. With the sustainability requirements that are coming forward, you cannot have that time frame. You need to revisit this sustainability strategy and the data parts of it on a more regular basis. 3-year time frame is not enough. It's not flexible. It's not agile enough. We might even talking in quarters or maybe twice a year or something similar to that. So just a little mindful note for that. And one of the next parts would be how we can utilize this data in one of the examples, and then I'll hand it over to you.
Brilliant. Cool. Let's look at a real life example. So we're first going to talk about Digital Product Passport. Digital Product Passport is coming into effect the end of 2026 and will be first rolled out for batteries. So I'll use batteries as an example for today with the idea that eventually it'll be scaled out to most products sold within the EU. So what makes up the Digital Product Passport? The Digital Product Passport consists of 3 levels: your core product data, your unique SKU data, and then your ownership initiative data. These collectively create what we would call a digital twin, meaning you've got this laptop here, but you can also have all the information about this laptop as a twin in the cloud with easy access to. So let's go through the levels of what makes up this digital twin. So at the bottom, you've got your core product data. This consists of your core product data, your marketing descriptions, your images, how you recycle a product, your bill of materials, your suppliers of this product, anything that is core and product. Above that, you have your, what we would call batch level data. So let's say I've got a battery and it's a lithium battery. Where is that lithium being mined? What part of the mine? They can get it so granularly detailed into what section that data is. But that will sit on top of your product data. And then on top of that, we'll have our ownership initiative data. This is what happens when I, maybe as a consumer, have bought a battery. I've used it for 3 years. It's working at 70% efficiency of that battery, and I'm ready to sell it on. I can then add the data that says, I've never had a car accident with my battery. It works perfectly fine. I've never had to replace anything, and it's working at 70%. I upload that data, so then someone who wants to buy it again can have that key information. Cool. So how do we govern this data? How do we make sure we've got all of the right core data in the right place? So we're going to take information like bill of materials from your suppliers, your product data, information from your suppliers, and your suppliers' location data. So where's parts of your bill of materials being created? What factory is this product being created at? HS codes to make sure it gets through customs, and documentation to make sure you've done your due diligence and are compliant with not only Digital Product Passport, but maybe a EU DR regulation or maybe a CBAM regulation. We need to make sure we can collect all this information and pull it into a system. When all this information is in a system, we have the ability to do a multitude of things in order to improve it and make sure it's fully up-to-date, enriched, and ready to be sent out. We can do this with workflows. So we get different teams within your sustainability organization or across your whole organization as a whole to enrich this information. We also have emission calculations. This is not necessarily a huge part of the Digital Product Passport, but you can take emission calculations and make carbon footprint estimates. We can have completeness and quality rules. So someone who can go over with a glance and say, okay, all of my products are up to date and they've got 100% completeness and quality, but these 6 don't. I need to focus on making sure they're up to date and the most enriched. So none of your products slip between the cracks. And then time-bound tasks. What we find with sustainability hugely is that everything has a date. Within 3 months, something has changed. These assessments do not last forever. You need to keep them up to date and regular. So that means I can create my sustainability information. I can add that to a product. I can enrich this information, and I can say, okay, I'm happy I've enriched it, but in 3 months' time, maybe I need to enrich this further and relook at it. So you can have a time-bound task I've published it now. In 3 months, I get an email, a notification that says, please have a look at this again. And then we also have references. What we find is sustainability data is beyond what a product is. There is location, supplier, suppliers of your suppliers, and having the ability to maintain different pieces of that sustainability data in one location to have one single source of the truth. So let's say I have a location and I want to measure it and make sure that this location is fair trade, has an ISO certification. I can manage all of that information at a location level and then reference that to the multiple products instead of having one product and having to put in that location level at each stage, because that will lead to inaccuracies or not putting in the data right or missing data. We can simply add all those aspects. And then finally, when we've enriched all this data and we're happy, we can send it downstream. And this could be to your digital product passport, to auditors, to your certifications, and much more. But how do we send this downstream, and how do we send this downstream in the most efficient way? Well, I've got a solution for you. We have this tool called DaaS, Data as a Service, which allows you to push information out of our STEP environment to a web page, to another system. Instead of doing API calls where you say, okay, I have this bunch of product data, let me send it in one call. Okay, I've got some location data, let me send that in another call. Okay, I've got this other supplier data, I send it in another call. Instead, you can dictate without any middleware, right, this is my key bits of information I need to send from this product, this location, and this supplier, and send it in one fell swoop. It's also hugely scalable, and it works in real time. So when you have a product, you have a sustainability solution that's only for batteries, but then you need to scale that so that it works for all of your products, you have the ability to do that. If you have a moment, I would suggest scanning this QR code, and you can see it in action. So this is our digital product passport, and it is a live call from our STEP system about every minute, and it has all of our key data, and it has key data from different products, or different objects within the system. So I've got location data on this sustainability data card, I've got supplier data, and bill of materials that I have referenced as different objects within the system, and of course my product data. And of course you can see a basic information on the product, and then it'll drill down into your bill of materials. That is my digital product passport. Another legislation we're seeing is CBAM, or the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism. And I will pass that over to Jesper to talk about.
Thank you. And if you didn't get the QR code, well, we can make sure you get it later. But what Elodie was talking about, that a lot of the data that would go into the digital product passport could be or would be similar to what we would also see from this carbon border adjustment mechanism initiative that have been put forward by the by EU. And it's a way to avoid carbon leakage, to take the EU word for it. So make sure that all the products that you are sourcing as part of your bill of material or for semi-product goods or what have you, that they are under the EU strict regulation. So if you're sourcing it from outside EU, then it could potentially be with some less governed information, and thereby maybe with an untrusted carbon footprint for that information. So EU is trying to set some rules or some borders around it to make sure that it is being controlled in a better way. And the thing about the CBAM part, that right now it's just about the reporting part. So reporting on a quarterly basis, how many products do I source from suppliers that is non-EU based. But in 2026, they will also start to enforce some different taxations to it. So there will also be some monetary consequences of it. So the CBAM part is tying back to the Paris 2015 agreement. So it's a part of the bigger initiative that the EU is doing under the umbrella of the European Green Deal. And there's a lot of other initiatives, as you can see on this one, and it's the one highlighted in the upper left corner. The current timeline is that, as said, we're in what they call a transition phase, where you will look at the data, collect it, find out how your product's being sourced into your organization, where it comes from, where the carbon tax have already been paid, and what have you. And right now, it's just about, well, sending that data to EU, and then they will be happy and all of that. But when moving out of the transition period and go into the full rollout, as said before, taxes will start to come. And they will also start to roll out this concept for all product categories. So similar to the digital product passport that will start in one area, so does the CBAM part. It's a lot about steel and fertilizers and hydrogen and similar. But later on, it will incorporate all products that are coming into EU. And just a simplified setup, you are sourcing products from a non-EU supplier. When it's coming to the border or crossing it, then it will be evaluated. Have they been paying the prices for it? Have they been looking at it? And then as an importer, you need a certificate to take this import in. But there might also be the other scenario where you are sourcing a product from an EU-based supplier, but they are buying the products from a supplier outside EU. So as Elodie was talking about the suppliers of suppliers, how do you actually collect this information? And as such, then you need to know whether they have been paying for this carbon price that is coming or following the product. So it all ties together, and the EU doesn't really care who's importing it. It's a matter of making sure that we're reducing the carbon emission. On this slide, there's a lot of details, and I'm not going to read through all of it, but just to highlight, say that be aware that there's a lot of data that you need to collect, and that's also coming back to the data strategy to make sure that you can connect the right dots in an agile way and take it forward. Because all this data that needs to come in on a product level, on a supplier level, maybe from a location point of view, maybe some town-bound things, it is tying back to the same principle as we were talking about before, this great sustainability data challenge. So it's some common things. So even though that we will be talking about these three things, the digital product passport, and the CBAM, and also the deforestation regulative, that was a difficult one, but it ties back to some of the same data. So having a centralized place for that. And we do see that in many companies, they are on what you would call a sustainability maturity path. So if we're looking at the lower part of this illustration, we would see that it is where you're kind of ignoring it, saying, hey, it's not going to happen. Somebody will think GDPR, that was a few years back, saying, hey, yeah, it's likely not going to hit us until we're getting the fines. That's one approach. Then moving up the ladder is about protecting the value of your organization. So starting to say, all right, we must do something to stay compliant, or we must do the things that we're obligated to do. But when we're moving above it, you will also start to take a proactive approach to this setup, how you actually are creating value for your business. Because sustainability and how you're approaching it will become a valuable effect in terms of how customers or your suppliers or your business partners may evaluate you as a go-to place for doing business. And sustainability data will enable this kind of transition from being protecting the value to actually being a value creator and moving up the ladder and say, well, it's about the efficiency things, what is the smart things to do, but also going and say, what is the long-term viability of our business and how we are being positioned in the market, but also what is the overall purpose, how do we create value, how do we share that with others so we can make informed decisions. And here in the end, we will have a couple of cases, and then I'll hand it over to you again, because we have actually been, well,
good on time.
Yeah, doing this, yeah.
Cool. Okay, I'll go through one of our use cases. These are just a few of the examples that we have solved for customers today, and then we'll have some questions. So I'll start with our ISO certification use case. So we had a company who came to us and said, right, I have products that are created across the globe, and they're made in different locations. Some of my locations have ISO certifications, and some of my locations don't have ISO certifications. I want to know if this product is made in these 3 locations, does it have an ISO certification attached to it for each one of those? And I want to know, as a whole, this product is made in an ISO certified site, whether it's made in America or in Europe. So what we did is we built each of their locations a sustainability data card, which is where we hold all the sustainability data. We added their assessment, so their ISO certification. We had a time-bound increment on that. So for this example, ISOs are measured in 3-year periods. So we added a 3-year period to it, and then we made a reference to the product. So we said, okay, if this product is made in Brazil, and this product is also made in Europe, we have the ability to reference the information of the ISO certifications. We also made it a rule that if Brazil gets all 3 ISO certifications and Europe has only 2, that the 3rd one will be knocked off. So that when they go to market, they can say this product is made an ISO certification with this and this legislation, but not necessarily the 3rd one until they've built up the 3rd one. But we also had the ability to capture the different KPIs that were measured there. So we could figure out, right, if you improve these sites with these ISO certifications, you're going to be able to improve the number of products you have with ISO certifications at a faster rate and help them specify which sites they really needed to focus on. Another use case we had was a company wanted to look at carbon factors, and they were managing emission factors and carbon accounting estimates in Excel spreadsheet files. So for one product and one product variation, they had an Excel file that had 9 sheets. 9 sheets for one product variation. And so what we did was take all of the emission factors they had, put them into list values, so that a user could go in very simply and add the weights of materials, the emission factor, or they could add how far the truck drove with this product in it, and the emission factor, and easily, within 2 minutes, create a carbon calculated estimate for a carbon footprint. There's 2 other use cases down there, and we'll most definitely happy to talk about them, but come find us at our booth. And we'll have some questions if you have any questions.